Welcome aboard the Rocky Mountaineer for day 2 on our trek to the east. We're leaving Kamloops, an early start in the dark. Sun's risen a little bit now and all the crew are there to wave us goodbye. A good night's sleep, and once again we start following the rivers eastward. Because we were second on the list yesterday morning, we were first on the list for breakfast this morning, and it was faultless once again. Beautiful meal. So we're going up through the valleys heading into the Rockies, but this just shows the devastation of those bushfires. There was 18.5 million hectares in 2003 that were burnt. That's 45.7 million acres, about twice the size of Portugal, if you have an idea of how vast it was. So it will take a while to recover. Facilities, top notch. Plenty of room in the toilets. Of course there's no showering because you have overnight stays in hotels. Once again, going out to the vestibule was a great way to see the countryside and just see the length of the train. And I think that's one of the spectacular things, is getting the photos of the train wending its way around the edge of the river. And I just need to clarify some statements from the last video. Some of my numbers for passengers seem to be up and down. Basically there was 850 passengers, but there is over 100 staff on the train, so it gets close to nearly 1,000 people travelling on this train. Train crew are out doing work on the rails. Seems to be a constant thing, which, seeing there's so much traffic going through this line, it is a constant upgrading because they're all heavy trains. They're not all light passenger trains zipping around. And here's another coal train we're going past, or it's going past us, as we sit and wait for it to clear. We're several hours late getting in to Kamloops, and the same thing happens on this trip into Banff. We're several hours late. You'll notice as we start passing over the rivers winding backwards and forwards, the colour starts changing as the glacial ice and silt starts to influence the area. And we have the last spike where the railway joined up from east to west. That's a memorial site as you go through. A few wagons on the side. I don't think that's ballast, a bit big for ballast, but more for shoring up bridge works. Now we didn't actually stop here, and I've taken some slides from the internet, but the Three Valley Lake Chateau and the Heritage Ghost Town, if you're on the Trans-Canadian Highway, it'd be worth a stop. From a train point of view, there's plenty to see. Once again, the lunch menu had a big variety to suit all tastes. We did have the steak and other things that we don't normally eat in our menu, but the prosciutto and the starters was a nice way to kick off the meal, and then at the end some desserts. So as I've said previously, you just cannot fault the meals. They were top notch. Back in the vestibule, just sped it up a bit, but trying to get some of the action shots. I believe these are the Sunwapta Falls from the Sunwapta River. Quite dramatic. The train slows right down as we go over them. They're one of the larger drops in Canada. For waterfalls as far as they go. And of course we're now getting up into the glacier country, and start seeing a bit more action in terms of the Rockies and what we've come to see. So you'll see the rivers starting to get that brighter blue tinge to them, and you can just see some snow caps over in the distance. This was supposed to be the autumn run. You can see there's some colour in the trees, but generally the leaves hadn't turned at this stage. They're all saying it's climate change and what was the way years before is no longer. Yes, the blue of the river is just unreal. It really is fantastic. And there's our first glimpse of the snow-capped Rockies coming around on our right and then on our left. There had been a dusting of snow the week before. Obviously it had melted, so they weren't at their best, but for people from Western Victoria and Australia, we just don't see the snow on mountains, so it was really well worthwhile viewing that.
In elevation through the spiral tunnels. So let me just give you some background story about the Big Hill. So obviously we spoke earlier at Craigellachie, and we knew that they were having a lot of troubles with the construction of the railway, and they were running out of money. So they didn't have any money to spend blowing through mountains to put in a series of tunnels to get down the hill at a steady gradient. Now, nowadays, and the same then, there was a set gradient of 2.5% for train travel, okay, to come down a hill. And the original Big Hill that they constructed for the railway was 4.5%. So you can imagine, that's pretty steep. It's very different as well with cars and rubber on tarmac compared to steel and steel on wheels on a train. There's not really any slowing down. So they didn't really have a choice, they didn't have any money, they didn't have any budget, and they had to complete this section of the railway. So they created the Big Hill. So they realised this was going to be a problem, so they came up with a couple of solutions. The first thing is that they created a train runoff. So you may have seen them in the highways. We have the runoffs for the big trucks that come by. They created that for the train, so that because it wouldn't be able to slow down in time, that they could run off to the side if need be. They also came up with the idea of they would have a locomotive on the front and on the back, and they would both be kind of putting their brakes on and trying to pull them. All of these things didn't really work. So the first time they came down the Big Hill on a train, unfortunately it did end in a crash, and the 3 engineers and the conductor were killed. So they realised that they couldn't continue like this. So they came up with a new plan, and that was that they wouldn't allow anyone to come down the Big Hill. So if you were travelling across the country on the Canadian Pacific Railway, when you got to Wapta Lake, which is at the top, they would take everybody off, they would take off all the dining room cars, and you would come down in a horse and cart down the hill, and they would let the train just run down. Now, this is not really going to continue to work very well, but I will tell you that we spoke about Lady Agnes MacDonald earlier at Stony Creek Bridge and how she's a bit of a daredevil. So when she was coming on her grand tour through Canada with her husband, John A. Macdonald, the Prime Minister, she said, well, I'm not getting off the train, I want to go down the hill. So they strapped her onto a cow catcher on the front, and off she went. Yeah, she was quite the daredevil. So that was Lady Agnes. So she came down the Big Hill in the original way of the train. But this continued, I think they continued this for around 10 to 20 years until they realised they couldn't keep doing this. And so what they did is they looked to Switzerland. So in Switzerland, they had already created the spiral tunnels, and it was very, very successful. So then they decided that they would do something very similar here. So how the spiral tunnels work is that they blasted through 2 mountains, Mount Cathedral and Mount Ogden. So the first mountain we're going to go through is Mount Ogden, and that is going to be right ahead of us here. And then we're going to go through Mount Cathedral, and that's kind of like over that way. So I'll point these out to you as we go through, okay? But yeah, we're just making our way up the big hill now. I wanted to give you the free story so you knew how that worked, and I will tell you more about the spiral tunnels so we go ahead a bit closer.
We return to Lake Louise in a few days. The Canadian leaves from Jasper, which is north of Banff. So we spent a couple of days in Banff with our nephew, and then had a couple of tours on our way up to Jasper, which is in a separate video entitled Banff, and that'll show you some of the glaciers and the more spectacular side of the Rocky Mountains. Banff was great. It's very much a tourist town. The motel was excellent, sort of a rustic sort of style. The train got in so late, so a burger was our only tea that night. The only other thing, I found out that you could buy these 1/87 scale Rocky Mountaineer gold leaf cars, and you can only get them on the train. I didn't realise at the time. I probably would have bought a few and then put them on the internet to sell them, but very beautiful detail. Would I go on the Rocky Mountaineer again? Probably not. I think the Canadian would be better value for money from Vancouver. But I've ticked it off the bucket list, and that's the main thing.